America, a land of prosperity and restlessness. Instant coffee and cornflakes have just been invented, and Thomas Edison just recently demonstrated the first talking motion picture machine.
Yet for all the innovation of this industrious and exciting era, women, among others, were still denied the basic tenets of citizenship. In the East, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth C. Stanton, and many like-minded women and organizations were fighting for the equal rights of women. But in a small Mormon community in a remote part of southern Utah, the glass ceiling was already beginning to crumble. Nina Laycook is the latest woman to fill the seat of mayor in Kanab, Utah, and carries on the torch of legacy ignited 100 years earlier.
At the turn of the last century, little old Kanab, Utah was one of the most remote communities in the country, and yet boasts a very forward-thinking and equality-minded event, the election of the very first all-women town council.
Along the border of Utah and Arizona, the town of Kanab in 1911 was one of the most remote and inaccessible communities in the United States. Yet history was made in this dusty cow town with the inauguration of the first all-women town council in an incorporated American city. But its genesis was much less of a vote for equal rights, and more the immaturity of the local men. Much of what we know of the event comes from the history of Mary Chamberlain, who was elected town mayor and president of the council.
When it was election time in 1911, the loafers on the ditch bank put Mary's name plus the other 4 council ladies on the ballot.
Ruth, Mary's sister, is quoted in Mary's history as saying that the morning of the election, these gentlemen of leisure, I don't know whether they were really of leisure, because one of them was Louis Jepson. He was a prominent businessman in town. But the story was that they were tired of listening to the women complain about what was going on in the all-male town council. And so they decided they would put their names on the ballot, all these women that were complaining.
The women that ended up being put on the ballot by the men of the community were probably those that were the most vocal about the concerns, but also wives of those gentlemen that were also interested in the community.
But what made the conditions ripe for such a prank to occur? Were the men tired of the nagging from these women about how the town was being run? Or was it the general political apathy felt by the townsfolk of this small ranching community?
The community at that time, 100 years ago, was quite rural and it was remote. They worked hard and they raised their families and they went to school and church and that type of thing. But people weren't real interested in politics or running their communities unless if an issue did come up.
Even the morning of election, there was no one on the ballot, so these men that were the ditch bank loafers, they called them, they wrote these women's names down as a prank and thought, we'll see what happens.
And so they put their names on the ballot that morning, and Mary said that they handed it to her father, Edwin Woolley, and he said, well, we'll just elect him. So evidently, those names that those men put on the ballot, with no one else running, were taken to the polls and people voted for them. They ran unopposed.
In 1911, Mary Chamberlain, Luella McAllister, Tamer Stewart Hamblin, Blanche Robinson Hamblin, and Vinnie Jepson were elected by the popular vote to the Kanab Town Council, without any of them even running for office. They didn't even know their names were on the ballot. One of the early breakthroughs in women's suffrage in the 20th century came to us as a prank.
And Mary was quite upset. I don't know how the other women felt, but Mary was quite upset and said that she didn't feel like she wanted to do that.
When Mary's father came home and told her that they were all elected, she made this comment. She was totally disgusted. She didn't think she could qualify. She just knew that if she accepted the responsibility that the other women would not. When the women were asked to take office, they didn't think they could handle the job. They wanted to back out.
But with the support of her husband and her father, she accepted, and so the other women did also.
The ladies considered it, they debated, then they discussed it and said, we can tackle the job.
And decided they might as well do it. They might as well go ahead and do what they could for the community.
One at a time, their intentions were swayed. With great trepidation, all but Vinnie Jepson accepted the vote. The wife of a local entrepreneur, she felt there was too much on her plate already as a mother and running the family business. Vinnie suggested her neighbor Ada Segmiller take her place on the council. The council agreed.
In Kanab, we just take it for granted. Yeah, we had an all-women town council 100 years ago. Other people think it's absolutely remarkable and they want to know more about it. Late in 2011, I thought, you know, next year is going to be the 100-year anniversary of the all-women town council. And I thought, well, as mayor, I've got to do something. And I thought, well, I'll do a resolution. Mayors always are doing resolutions. And it was as if the ladies were looking at me saying, look at that scowl. Nina, you could do better than that.
And do better she did. Mayor Nina Laycook brought the story of the all-women town council to life as a live traveling show.
So I gave it a little thought, and I got the inspiration of meeting with the ladies. I would be contemporary, and they would come visit me from time to time in their period attire, and they would ask me for updates on the things they worked on 100 years ago. So I called 5 ladies, 5 wonderful ladies that I knew could help me pull this off, and they just picked up the idea and ran with it. Everything from the scripting to the costuming and the skit that we did, and we've had a lot of fun with this. And most of all, we've really come to honor the all-women town council 100 years ago.
Because I have so many issues I want to discuss with Mayor Laycook. Could you maybe move into a closed session and discuss them and get back to me with a solution?
Well, the outlawing of flippers has resulted in many of our boys being more humane to animals.
Pigs are such a, and besides they smell bad, and well, when they get into my yard, I just take my broom and I just...
My name is Linda Alderman. I write the scripts for the performances that we do. And in learning about these ladies, and each one of us have done our own research on these ladies, I feel like those ladies are there. And it's been amazing to get to know them closer and get to know more about them, and also feel them present as we perform and as we practice and as we learn and discuss what these ladies did.
During our script, the ladies go into how they had the vote and this and that, but and that's all important. But I wanted to dispel the notion that rural Mormon women were undervalued and that type of thing. And it wasn't true. The men, as a matter of fact, Mormon men loved their women and gave them a lot of credit and all the freedom they wanted, so it was not accurate anyway. And I think the whole story about the all-women town council helps to dispel that rumor. They were quite powerful.
Nina's troupe would not only perform before the current town council and local school children, but would reach across the state of Utah. Word of these women and the all-women town council reached north to the capital city, where they would be presented and perform before both houses of the legislature and be recognized by Utah Governor Gary Herbert.
Mayor, this is a flipper. Anyone caught using one of these within the city limits was fined 25 cents and 50 cents for every offense thereafter. Why, our fine feathered friends were just dropping out of trees.
Can I see that a minute, Mary? We call these slingshots. I can't hardly believe that you outlawed these. You know, I could have used one of these at the city council meeting the other night. I had a couple of rowdies in the audience. I'd have taken a big old brown pinto bean and put it in there and gone pow! Woo!
For 2 years, the women would share this historic story, commemorating the 2 years of service given by Mary, Tamer, Ada, Luella, and Blanche 100 years before.
The outgoing board surrendered their chairs with good grace and expressed good wishes to us, and it was a very nice gesture. And when the clock chimed, I said, Enough lollygagging. I put a log on the fire and said, ladies, let's show them what we can do. And we got down to work.
The women each came to council with a vision of things that needed to be done. After taking office, each woman wrote down her concerns for the community. They then combined their efforts to accomplish as much as they could during their term in office.
These women had several accomplishments while in office. First, they imposed fines on the peddlers and merchants that were coming through to do business. Then they had built wooden bridges over the irrigation ditches along the sidewalks.
The women then began to curtail the free-roaming animals. Livestock, horses, and all animals, including dogs, would no longer be allowed to freely meander through the streets of town.
And dogs had to be licensed, and they were limited to about 2 or 3 per household. They were also charged a fine annually.
They also passed ordinances to move all corrals, feedlots, and chicken coops back from any street or public road by 50 feet. The next steps in their campaign to clean things up included the removal of the terrible problem of flies and noxious weeds.
They wanted to make sure that the town was kept clean. They had little competitions, or whoever had the best kept street or yard. And sometimes it would be as much as $10 for the winner. Anyone caught using a slingshot inside the city limits were fined 25 cents for the first offense and 50 cents for the second offense.
The cemetery was one of those issues that was of a particular interest to Luella McAllister, who was the council's recorder and treasurer.
Luella took on the project of wanting to get the cemetery upgraded and nicer because it was a dusty, dirty place, and it's such a sacred place. It should have been a nicer place for those who were laid to rest there. There was no fence. The cattle would get in there. There was no grass or anything like that. In fact, they didn't even plot the cemetery. They just buried people there when they passed away. So the All-Women Town Council made that one of their projects. And they went through and they plotted the cemetery, they fenced it, and they worked hard to make it a better place.
Through the efforts of the council, the area was plotted, fenced, and plots were sold by the city to help pay for the upkeep of the newly beautified Kanab Cemetery. With the physical needs of the community in the pipe, some attention was turned toward the moral welfare of the community. The women were devout and religious, and they felt there was too much Sabbath breaking, and so banned activities such as horse racing and games on Sunday that would take away from the day of rest.
To keep the Sabbath day, rowdy games and horse races were outlawed on Sundays, as well as businesses were not allowed to sell any unnecessary items. Gambling or games of chance were also outlawed.
Though it was largely a Mormon community, the ladies of the council noticed an alarming trend with alcohol in their own community and in some cases their very homes. Laws banning the sale of alcohol were easily passed by the ladies, but they had a harder time with enforcement. Community drinkers found diverse and unique ways to get their prized drink.
The town people were all in agreement with everything that was going to be done.
Like the livestock around town, gambling, the liquor, the Sabbath breaking that was going on. The men kind of were slack in keeping up with the ordinance. The ordinances, a lot of them had been made,
but nobody had followed through, and I think that was what the town said. We want these things done.
Not that the men didn't have desires to put things into action, but it was just getting it done. They were out farming and ranching and taking care of the necessary needs to sustain life in their families.
The men had these ideas, the community had these ideas, but nobody was taking the initiative to go forward with it. So I think what the women did is kind of tied everything up in a neat, tidy bow and said, here you go, it's going to be done, let's do it this way, and that's what they did.
I think those women were, when they said they would do something, they definitely did what they said they would do. I don't think they really wanted to, but when they discovered that no one else was going to do it, they were serious about making changes that they felt were important. And they did leave quite a legacy. Some of the laws that they enacted are still on the books today.
And I might add that at the close of their leadership, it was said in a newspaper by D.D. Rust, who was a common reporter at the time, these women closed an administration that from the standpoints of integrity, ability, and enforcement of ordinances has never been equaled in Kanab before. They had served in the face of some very bitter ridicule. So from 1912 to 1914, they gave their all.
We didn't ask for this, it was just a joke.